The question that changed everything. The coffee shop was quiet that morning. The rain outside tapped against the large windows, filling the silence with a soft rhythm. The smell of roasted beans floated in the air, warm and inviting. Most customers had their heads bent over laptops or were lost in books and quiet conversations. At a corner table sat Lucas Blake, 35 years old, dressed in a dark tailored suit. His posture was straight, his face calm but unreadable. His untouched espresso sat in front of him, steam curling up only to fade away into the air. He wasn't there for coffee. He wasn't there for company. He came to the cafe almost every morning simply because it was quieter than his empty apartment. Lucas Blake was not just another man in a suit. He was the CEO of Blake Technologies, a billion-dollar tech empire that powered half the city. He was known in boardrooms for his sharp decisions, his cold logic, and his lack of emotion. Employees whispered about him, calling him the machine. He rarely smiled. He rarely spoke more than he had to. And yet, on this quiet morning, something unexpected happened. "Excuse me, can I sit here? I'm really tired." The voice was soft, fragile, almost like a whisper carried by the rain. Lucas looked up, slightly startled. Standing beside his table was a little girl. She looked no older than 3. She clutched a small, worn-out teddy bear in one arm, its fur almost faded from years of love. Her other hand tugged at the pink woolen hat pulled tightly over her head. Her large, glassy eyes stared at him with both innocence and exhaustion. Lucas blinked. He was not a man children approached. He had no children of his own. His world was filled with meetings, contracts, numbers, and endless silence. And yet here was this tiny stranger looking at him as if he were the only safe place in the room. "Can I sit here?" she repeated, at her voice trembling slightly. Lucas noticed the pale shade of her cheeks. He noticed how her little body leaned as if even standing was too much effort. Then his eyes caught something else. Beneath the pink hat there was almost no hair. His chest tightened without warning. For a moment Lucas didn't know what to say. He was used to controlling markets, running billion-dollar projects, silencing boardrooms with a single word. But right now, he found himself silent, struggling with a question from a 3-year-old girl. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Yes, you can sit here." The little girl's face softened with relief. She climbed carefully onto the chair across from him, hugging her teddy bear to her chest. Her legs swung just above the floor, too short to reach. She gave a small sigh as if sitting down was the greatest gift anyone could give her. Lucas found himself watching her. Something inside him stirred, something he thought had died years ago. Her eyes. There was something about her eyes. Large, clear, and far too wise for a child her age. They reminded him of someone. They pierced through his guarded heart like a memory he had buried deep. For a moment, his breath caught. He almost saw her again, his late wife, Clara, smiling through those same kind of eyes. He shook the thought away, trying to steady himself. This was just a stranger's child, nothing more. But the girl leaned her teddy bear onto the table and whispered, "He's tired too. He doesn't like waiting." Lucas frowned. "Your bear?" She nodded seriously. "Yes, he doesn't like waiting when mommy is gone too long." Lucas felt something shift again. He wanted to ask where her mother was. He wanted to ask why she was alone, but before he could, the girl coughed, a small, weak cough that seemed to drain her tiny body. Lucas instinctively reached for a napkin, sliding it across the table. She smiled faintly and said, "Thank you." No one had thanked Lucas in years, not in a way that felt real. His employees thanked him, but out of fear. Partners thanked him, but out of profit. This little girl's thank you was pure, genuine, and it shook him. He leaned back, studying her. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, clutching the teddy bear tighter. Then, with a small voice, she said, "Lily." Lily. The name echoed in his chest. His late wife had loved lilies. Their home once smelled of them every spring. He hadn't thought of that in years. Lucas looked away, trying to hide the sudden storm building inside him. He did not like feeling vulnerable. He did not like remembering. But fate didn't care about what Lucas liked. Because this little girl, fragile, sick, and innocent, had just pulled him into a story he never expected to live again. The door to the cafe opened suddenly, and Lucas glanced up. His eyes landed on a young woman rushing in, her coat damp from the rain. She scanned the room in panic, her eyes wide until they landed on the little girl at his table. Relief washed over her face as she hurried toward them. Lucas's gaze lingered on her. He had no idea that this moment, this girl, this mother, would tear down every wall he had built around his heart. And it had all started with one simple question: the mother's arrival. The cafe door swung open with a sharp creak, and the cool air followed the woman rushing in from the rain. Her long, dark hair clung damply to her cheeks, and her beige coat, now soaked at the edges, gave away the speed of her movements. She paused only for a second at the entrance, scanning the room with frantic eyes until they locked onto the little girl at Lucas's table. In that instant, her panic softened into pure relief. "Lily!" she exclaimed, rushing forward. The little girl turned her head with a tired but happy smile, lifting her teddy bear slightly, as if to wave it at her mother. The woman dropped to her knees beside the chair, checking her daughter's face, her hands, even brushing her fingers gently over the pink hat as though making sure nothing had happened in those few short minutes she had been gone. Lucas sat back, watching silently. The woman's presence filled the space like a quiet storm, gentle and fierce all at once. He noticed the faint circles beneath her eyes, the way her breath still came quick from rushing, and the way she held her daughter as if she were more fragile than glass. It wasn't the polished look of the women Lucas usually encountered at galas or business meetings. There were no diamonds, no rehearsed smiles, no calculated charm. She was simply a mother, raw with love and fear. "I told you to stay close," she whispered, her voice trembling as she pressed a kiss onto Lily's pale cheek. "You scared me." "I was tired, Mommy," Lily said softly, her small voice barely above the hum of the cafe. "And the nice man said I could sit here." The woman froze, her eyes lifting slowly toward Lucas. For a long second she studied him, as if weighing whether he was danger or safety. Her gaze was sharp, protective, almost challenging. Lucas, used to being recognized instantly as a powerful CEO, was caught off guard. She didn't flinch, didn't soften at the sight of him in his tailored suit, didn't seem impressed by his presence. Instead, she looked at him like a mother wolf deciding if the stranger near her cub could be trusted. Lucas cleared his throat, breaking the silence between them. "She asked politely," he said quietly, his voice calm but steady. "I only gave her the seat." The woman's eyes lingered on him for another breath before she nodded, pulling Lily closer. "Thank you," she said. The words were polite, but her tone carried a weight that told Lucas she didn't hand out trust easily. He found himself strangely unsettled. Most people bent to his presence, board members, journalists, investors. They either respected him or feared him. But this woman looked at him like he was simply a man, no more and no less. It was unfamiliar. It was uncomfortable, and yet it was refreshing. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his curiosity getting the better of him. "She's very brave," he murmured, watching Lily stroke the ear of her teddy bear. The woman's eyes softened when she looked at her daughter again. "Brave doesn't even begin to cover it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Lucas caught it, though. He noticed the way her shoulders dropped when she said it, the way her fingers lingered on the back of Lily's hand as if grounding herself. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to ask what she meant, why Lily's cheeks were pale, why her little body seemed so tired, why her small cough earlier had sounded so heavy for someone so young. But before he could open his mouth, the woman stood, smoothing her coat as though preparing to leave. "Come on, Lily," she said gently, offering her hand. But Lily shook her head, clutching the teddy bear tighter. "I like it here," she said in a whisper. Then she looked at Lucas, her eyes wide and innocent. "I like him, Mommy. He has kind eyes." For a moment, the entire world seemed to still. Lucas felt the words hit him harder than any accusation, any victory, any loss he had ever faced in business. Kind eyes. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had called him that. He wasn't sure he ever had them. Yet this small, sick child, in all her honesty, said it as if it were the truest thing in the world. The woman swallowed. her hand tightening slightly on her daughter's. "That's very sweet, Lily," she said, her voice uneven. She looked back at Lucas, and there was something different in her gaze now, something softer, reluctant, but real. "We should go." But Lucas, before he could stop himself, spoke up. "Wait!" The word surprised even him. He wasn't used to asking people to wait. He wasn't used to reaching out, but something inside him, the part that had gone quiet since Clara's death, was stirring again. He looked at the woman, at Lily, at the fragile bond between them, and he couldn't let them walk out of his life just yet. "Maybe," he hesitated, then continued, "maybe she should finish resting. It's still raining outside." His tone was careful, almost unfamiliar to his own ears. "You're welcome to stay." The woman studied him again, torn between instinct and exhaustion. Her protective nature battled with the undeniable truth. Her daughter was pale, her legs weak, and the rain outside was heavy. For a long moment she said nothing. Finally, she exhaled softly and pulled out the chair beside Lily. "Only for a little while," she murmured. Lucas nodded, a subtle relief crossing his features. As they sat together in the quiet cafe, something unspoken settled between them, an invisible thread tying their worlds together. None of them knew yet, but this fragile beginning would change everything. The conversation that shouldn't have happened. The cafe had settled back into its usual rhythm. The rain outside beat a steady pulse against the wide glass windows, and the smell of coffee lingered like a blanket over the room. People came and went, most too wrapped up in their own worlds to notice the unusual trio in the corner, an immaculate CEO, a fragile child hugging her teddy, and a tired mother who looked as though the weight of the world pressed on her shoulders. Lucas had never been one for small talk. In business, every word he spoke was calculated, designed to move deals forward or crush competition. Silence to him was often more powerful than words. Yet now, sitting across from this little girl and her mother, silence felt different. It wasn't commanding, it was curious, almost uncomfortable, as though he was standing at the edge of a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. Lily leaned her head gently against her mother's arm, the teddy bear pressed close to her chest. The woman stroked her daughter's back with absent tenderness, but her eyes were on Lucas. They were sharp and cautious, still holding that protective edge, yet beneath the steel he could see exhaustion. Not just the exhaustion of someone caught in the rain or someone who had worked too many late nights. No, this was deeper. This was the exhaustion of someone who carried battles alone, someone who fought every day and had long since forgotten what it meant to rest. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now, "for letting her sit with you. She doesn't usually talk to strangers." Lucas tilted his head slightly. "She didn't ask. She insisted," he replied, a trace of something almost like humor touching his tone. It startled him. Humor was not something he had entertained in years. The woman's lips curved faintly, almost against her will, but the smile didn't linger. "Yes," she said softly, glancing at her daughter. "That's Lily. When she wants something, she doesn't wait for permission." Lucas looked at the child again. She was stroking her teddy's ear with a kind of absent rhythm, as if it grounded her. Her cheeks were pale, her movements slow, but there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know why such a small child looked so tired, why her mother's gaze carried so much worry. Yet he hesitated because he knew from his own life that wounds rarely wanted to be examined by strangers. Still, curiosity outweighed his silence. "She's unwell," he said carefully, more as a statement than a question. The woman's hand froze for a brief second on her daughter's back. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp again, protective walls slamming back into place. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer, but then she exhaled slowly, the bit of breath people take when they are too tired to lie. "Yes," she whispered. "She is." Lucas felt the weight of those words settle on the table between them. He didn't press, though every part of him wanted to. Instead, he nodded slowly, his gaze softening despite himself. "She's stronger than she looks," the woman added quickly, as though she couldn't allow pity to creep into the air. "She fights, every day, but some days Her voice trailed off and she glanced down at her daughter. Some days are harder. Lucas studied her carefully. The words weren't just about the child, they were about the mother too. He saw the fight in her posture, the way she sat upright as if she couldn't afford to collapse, the way her hands lingered protectively on her daughter even when there was no danger. She carried her daughter's battles as though they were her own. For the first time in years, Lucas felt something inside his chest shift. He had been called ruthless, cold, unfeeling, and maybe he had been, ever since Clara died. Grief had carved out his heart and left only precision and logic behind. But now, looking at this woman and her fragile child, he felt the faintest ache of recognition. They were carrying pain. He knew that weight. He had lived under it too. "Do you come here often?" he asked quietly, surprising even himself. The woman blinked, clearly not expecting him to continue the conversation. "Sometimes," she admitted cautiously. "On better days, Lily likes to watch the rain from the window." She gave a small smile, brushing her daughter's pink hat lightly. "She says it makes the world feel clean again." Lucas's gaze drifted to the rain running down the glass, streaking the city into blurred shapes. He had never thought of it that way. To him, rain was just another inconvenience, another variable in a schedule that never slowed. But to this little girl, it was hopes, a reminder that even storms could wash the world anew. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He cleared it, forcing his voice steady. "And you? Do you like the rain?" The woman looked at him, startled by the question. No one had asked her something so small, so personal in a long time. She hesitated, then gave a faint shrug. "It hides tears well," she said softly. Lucas froze. He hadn't expected that answer. He hadn't expected honesty, not from a stranger, but her words cut through him, clean and sharp. He remembered Clara standing by the window of their home during storms, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and beauty. He had forgotten what it felt like to have someone speak truth without fear. For a long moment they simply sat there, the CEO who had locked his heart away, the mother who carried battles too heavy for her shoulders, and the little girl who, without realizing it, had already tied them together. The cafe buzzed quietly around them, but their table felt isolated, as though the world outside no longer mattered. Lucas knew, without fully understanding why, that this was not an ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of something he could neither predict nor control. And that realization unsettled him more than any hostile takeover or financial storm he had ever faced. But deep inside, beneath the armor he had built around himself, it also awakened something he thought had been buried with his wife, the possibility of connection. And as he watched Lily press her tiny face against her mother's arm and close her eyes, whispering something only her Teddy could hear, Lucas knew he wasn't ready to let them go. Not yet. Shadows of truth. The cafe remained a cocoon of warmth against the rain outside, but at their small corner table, the air was heavy with unspoken truths. Lucas Blake had always been a man who thrived on silence, using it as a weapon, a shield, a tool to dominate rooms where power was currency. Yet here, across from a woman whose name he still didn't know and a child whose fragility tore at something buried in his chest, silence no longer belonged to him. It was no longer control, it was invitation. The mother shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking off into Lily as if checking each breath, each tiny movement, as though the world might tilt if she stopped watching. Lucas noticed this instinctive rhythm of hers, the constant reaching, the touch on her daughter's shoulder, the way her hand hovered near the girl's back. He understood now. She lived in vigilance. She didn't get to relax. She couldn't. Not when every day seemed to be a battle between holding on and letting go. "You're tired," Lucas said finally, his voice steady but softer than he intended. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. The woman's lips curved into something like a bitter smile. "That's one word for it," she replied, her voice carrying exhaustion far deeper than the sleepless circles under her eyes. "You don't have help?" Lucas asked carefully. She gave a faint laugh, though there was no joy in it. "Help?" She shook her head, tucking a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "Help is expensive, and charity only stretches so far. The rest, I figure out on my own." Her words hit Lucas harder than he expected. In his world, money solved everything. When something broke, you replaced it. When you were weak, you hired strength. When you were lonely, you filled the room with people who pretended not to notice the cracks. He lived in a reality where resources bent the world in his favor. And yet, here was this woman living in another reality entirely, one where survival meant sacrifice, where every choice was measured against bills, medicine, food, and rent. He wanted to ask, what happened? What illness? What does Lily need? But something in the mother's posture warned him not to. She wasn't ashamed, but she was protective, and Lucas realized that to pry would be to push her further behind the wall she already kept between them. So instead, he asked something simpler. Do you work? Her gaze shifted quickly to him, sharp again, like a reflex. Yes, she said firmly. I work. I clean offices, sometimes houses, nights mostly, whatever pays. She paused, her fingers stroking Lily's hair beneath the pink wool hat. Her voice dropped lower, as if speaking to herself. It's not enough, but it has to be. Lucas leaned back, studying her. He thought of his own offices, immaculate, modern spaces filled with glass and steel. People like her moved through them unnoticed, cleaning the fingerprints from the windows, sweeping away the dust no one thought twice about. He had passed them 100 times, never once stopping to look. Until now, until this moment, when the reality of one such life sat across from him with tired eyes and a daughter who held on to a teddy bear like it was a lifeline. I see, he said quietly, and he meant it, not as polite filler, but as acknowledgement. He saw her in a way he hadn't allowed himself to see anyone in years. She shifted uncomfortably, as if unused to being looked at that way. Why are you asking me these things? Lucas hesitated. It was a fair question. He was a stranger. To her, he was just a man in a suit who happened to be sitting at the right table when her daughter wandered off. But to himself, something about this encounter felt fated, unsettling, necessary. He didn't have an answer that would make sense, not to her and not to himself. So he told the closest truth he could manage. Because I want to know, he said simply. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment, searching for deception, and she must not have found it because she exhaled slowly and looked down at her daughter again. Most people don't, she murmured. Lucas felt the weight of those words. Most people didn't want to know. Most people looked away from struggle, from sickness, from anything that might pierce their comfortable illusions. He had been one of those people. For years, since Clara's death, he had wrapped himself in distance, in wealth, in the illusion that isolation was safety. But Lily's voice had broken that, and her mother's truth was tearing down what remained. The rain grew heavier, blurring the outside world into gray streaks. Lily stirred slightly, opening her eyes just enough to look at Lucas. You're quiet, she whispered, her voice thin. Lucas almost smiled. I've been told that before, he answered softly. Mommy says quiet people have the loudest hearts, Lily said matter-of-factly, before resting her cheek back against her mother's arm. The words hit him with the weight of prophecy. A child had just spoken the thing no one else dared say, that beneath his cold exterior, the part of him he buried long ago was still there, still beating, still waiting. Lucas's throat tightened. He looked at the mother, but she avoided his gaze this time, her lips pressed tightly as though her daughter's words had revealed too much. And in that moment, Lucas knew something with absolute clarity. This was not the last time he would see them. He didn't know how, and he didn't know why, but something inside him had already decided. He would not let them slip back into the shadows. What he couldn't yet know was how deeply that decision would change everything. For him, for Lily, and for the woman whose name he still did not know. The name she tried to hide. The cafe had thinned out as the rain outside grew heavier. The chatter of students with laptops and the clinking of cups had quieted, leaving the soft hum of an espresso machine and the faint patter of rain against glass. For most, this was an ordinary afternoon. For Lucas Blake, it felt like a turning point, though he couldn't yet explain why. He sat back in his chair, his eyes steady on the woman across from him. She hadn't told him much, only fragments of her life, the cleaning jobs, the long nights, the battles she didn't name. But her silence carried as much weight as her words. He recognized that kind of silence. It was the silence of someone who had been forced to carry pain so long it became a second skin. She adjusted Lily's hat gently, the same protective rhythm she had repeated a dozen times since arriving. Her daughter had drifted into a half-sleep, head leaning against her arm, small breaths fogging the surface of the teddy bear. Lucas watched them, a strange feeling rising in him. He had built walls so high after Clara's death that no one had come close in years. Yet here, with this woman and her child, he felt those walls cracking, not from force but from something far gentler, something undeniable. At last he spoke. "I never asked your name." The woman froze for a moment, her fingers stilling against her daughter's hat. She seemed reluctant, as though even giving her name meant surrendering a piece of control. But Lucas's gaze stayed steady, not demanding, simply waiting. Finally, she exhaled softly. "Anna," she said. "My name is Anna." The sound of it lingered in the air between them. Simple, unadorned, but carrying the weight of stories untold. Lucas repeated it quietly in his mind. Anna. It suited her, he thought. Strong, plain, but elegant in the way strength often is when it doesn't try to be. "Anna," he said aloud, as if testing it. "And Lily." He looked at the child, then back at her mother. Fitting names, both resilient. Anna gave a faint smile, but it vanished quickly. "Names don't change circumstances," she murmured. Lucas tilted his head. "No, but sometimes they carry hope." Her eyes flicked to his, searching, almost as if surprised that a man in a suit, someone who looked as though he lived far above her world, would speak of hope. "Hope doesn't pay hospital bills," she said bluntly, her voice low but steady. The words struck him harder than he expected. He had known Lily was sick, but this was the first time Anna had spoken the truth directly. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Hospital bills?" he echoed. Anna's lips pressed tightly together, as though she regretted letting the words slip. She looked away, brushing her hand along Lily's back as if the movement could erase her admission. But Lucas had already heard it, and the truth hung heavy in the air. "You don't have to tell me everything," Lucas said slowly, his voice calm but firm. "But I can see it. She's fighting something bigger than a cough. And you," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "you're carrying it alone." Anna's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing with defiance. "I don't need pity. I don't need someone swooping in thinking they can fix everything. People like you." She gestured briefly at his suit, his expensive watch, his composed posture. "You see problems as things money can erase, but this isn't a broken contract or a machine that needs replacing. This is my daughter, my life." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her gaze firm. "And I will fight for her until I have nothing left." For a long moment, Lucas said nothing. He could have responded with logic, with offers of financial aid, with the kind of solutions that had always been at his fingertips. But something in her, words, in her raw defense of her daughter stopped him. She wasn't wrong. Money alone couldn't fight every battle. The breaking point. The rain outside had grown heavier, hammering against the cafe windows like an unrelenting drum. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and baked bread, but at their table, tension hung thick, fragile, and unspoken. Lucas Blake had faced hostile takeovers, media scandals, billion-dollar gambles that could make or break empires. Yet nothing in his life, nothing in the world of power and strategy compared to the quiet storm across from him. A woman clinging to dignity she could barely afford, and a child who fought for each breath like a soldier born too young for the battlefield. Anna leaned against the table, her hand brushing her daughter's shoulder in constant reassurance. Her exhaustion was plain now. She could no longer mask it behind careful words or strong posture. She looked like someone balancing on the edge of collapse but refusing to let gravity win, because her daughter's weight was tied to her own. Lucas studied her silently, the words still echoing in his mind. Hospital bills. In his world, the numbers in her struggle were nothing. To her, they were mountains she carried daily. And then, without warning, Lily coughed again. Only this time it was different. The sound was harsher, deeper, more violent. Her small body bent forward as though the cough itself were pulling her under. The teddy bear slipped from her grasp, falling to the floor unnoticed. Anna reacted instantly, sliding to her knees beside her daughter, hands steady, but eyes wide with fear. "Lily," Anna whispered urgently, holding her daughter upright. "Sweetheart, breathe with me. Just breathe." But Lily's chest rattled, her lips trembling as the color began to drain from them. A thin, wheezing sound filled the space between each shallow breath. Around them, the cafe seemed to fall silent, the normal clatter of cups and conversation dimming as eyes turned toward the corner table. Lucas's heart pounded, a heavy drum against his ribs. For a split second he was frozen like he had been years ago the night Clara's breathing had faltered in their bedroom, when all his wealth and power could do nothing to stop death's hand from reaching. But this time, something broke through the paralysis. He stood suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the cafe's stunned silence. "Call an ambulance," he barked toward the counter. His tone carried the weight of someone who was used to being obeyed, and within seconds the barista was fumbling for her phone. He dropped to one knee beside Anna, his expensive suit forgotten, his polished shoes soaking in the spill of water from the knocked-over bottle. He didn't care. His focus was on the tiny girl gasping for air. "Keep her upright," he said, his voice low but firm. "Don't let her lean back. She needs her airway clear." Anna's eyes flicked to him, wide with panic but also surprise. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her daughter's fragile body against her chest. "She needs her inhaler," Anna choked out. It's in my bag." Lucas moved without hesitation, snatching the worn canvas bag from the chair beside her. He rifled through it, pulling out small bottles, tissues, receipts, until his fingers closed around a familiar plastic shape. He handed it to Anna, his movement swift and certain, as though his life had prepared him for this moment. Anna pressed the inhaler to Lily's lips, whispering encouragement. "Breathe, baby. Just one deep breath. Please." Her voice cracked with desperation, but Lily managed, weakly drawing the medicine into her lungs. Another cough rattled her chest, but this time it was less sharp, less suffocating. Slowly, painfully, her breathing steadied, though it remained shallow. Lucas exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands, usually steady enough to sign contracts worth billions without flinching, trembled as he placed the bag back on the chair. He looked at the child's pale face, at the sweat beading her small forehead, and something in him broke further. He would not stand by this time. Anna clutched her daughter close, her own tears slipping silently down her face, though her voice stayed soothing for Lily's sake. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here. You're safe." She pressed her cheek against her daughter's damp skin, her arms tightening as though shielding her from the world. Lucas reached out before he could stop himself, his hand steadying Anna's shoulder. She turned her head sharply, eyes blazing with fear and anger, ready to push him away. But when she met his gaze, she faltered. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't looking at her like a man who wanted to rescue or control. His eyes were steady, raw, and filled with something she hadn't expected, shared pain. He understood. Somehow he understood. "She needs more than this," Lucas said softly, his voice low but firm. "This is temporary. She needs care, real care, and you shouldn't have to fight this alone." Anna swallowed hard, her chest heaving. "I've been alone for years," she whispered bitterly. "It's the only way I know how to fight." Lucas shook his head, his grip on her shoulder gentle but unyielding. "Then maybe it's time you didn't." Around them, the sound of sirens faintly echoed in the distance, growing louder as the ambulance approached. The cafe staff hovered anxiously, whispering to one another, but no one dared intrude on the intensity of the moment at that table. For Lucas, it felt like a line had been drawn in the sand. All his years of detachment, of coldness, of burying his heart beneath steel and glass, this moment shattered them. Clara's death had taught him to fear connection, but this child's struggle, this mother's unyielding fight, had reminded him that life was more fragile than any fortune, and that to remain untouched was not strength, but cowardice. The paramedics burst through the cafe doors, their uniforms wet from the storm outside. They moved quickly, kneeling beside Anna, checking Lily's pulse, her oxygen, her breathing. One of them looked up and asked, "Family?" Anna opened her mouth, but Lucas spoke first, his voice clear and certain. "Yes." Anna's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide in shock. For a moment, she wanted to correct him, to push him back into the category of stranger. But as she held her trembling daughter in her arms and saw the steady resolve in his eyes, something inside her faltered. Because the truth was undeniable. In that moment, in that fight, Lucas Blake had acted as if Lily were his own. And whether she was ready or not, Anna realized her life had just collided with his in a way that neither of them could undo. A new beginning. The ambulance ride had been a blur for Anna. The flashing red lights reflected off the wet streets, the sound of sirens cutting through the storm like a desperate cry for time itself to slow down. She sat inside, holding Lily's small hand tightly, whispering comfort even as her heart hammered with dread. Every bump in the road felt like a mountain, every second stretched into eternity. Yet when she looked across the small space, she saw Lucas Blake sitting there as well, his dark suit soaked, his expression grim but steady. He had not been asked to come, but he had stepped into the ambulance without hesitation, as though it were the most natural decision in the world. At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly, wheeling Lily into a pediatric emergency ward. Anna clung to the edge of the bed until a nurse gently but firmly pulled her back. "We'll take care of her," the nurse promised, but Anna's chest ached as the doors swung shut, leaving her standing in the corridor with nothing but the sound of machines beeping beyond the walls. She pressed her back against the cold white wall, trembling with exhaustion, tears blurring her vision. For the first time in years, she felt the temptation to collapse, to let go of the mask of strength she had worn so long. And when her knees buckled slightly, it was Lucas who steadied her. He placed a hand gently under her arm, guiding her to a chair in the corner of the waiting room. His touch was firm but careful, not controlling, simply there to remind her she wasn't alone. Anna sat down heavily, burying her face in her hands. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Every day. It's a fight just to keep her breathing, to keep her alive. I work, I clean, I sell everything I can, but the bills never stop. The treatments, the doctors, they want money I don't have. And every time she coughs, I'm terrified it will be the last." Her shoulders shook as the words spilled out, words she had never allowed herself to admit aloud. "She's all I have, and I'm so afraid I'm not enough for her." Lucas listened in silence, his jaw tight, his hands clenched together as though holding himself still. For years he had been numb, shutting out pain, locking away his grief behind steel doors. But hearing Anna's confession was like hearing his own fears spoken back to him. He had once sat in a hospital just like this, holding Clara's hand, promising her it would be okay even as her body failed her. He had felt powerless, even with all his wealth. And when she was gone, he had sworn never to let himself feel that helpless again. But now, with Anna's trembling words and Lily's fragile life behind those doors, he realized he had a choice: remain a man closed off or step into the fight he had once run from. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You are enough," that he said. "You've carried more than anyone should have to, and you're still here. That makes you stronger than anyone I've ever met." But Anna, his eyes held hers unwavering. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Anna looked at him, her breath catching. She wanted to protest, to push him away, to remind him that they had met only hours ago. But she saw no pity in his eyes, no fleeting charity. What she saw was something deeper, something raw. A man who had known loss, who had walked through grief, and who was choosing to step into hers, not out of obligation, but because something in her and her daughter had reached him in a way nothing else ever had. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse. "Why would you care?" Lucas swallowed, his throat tightening as he forced the truth into words. "Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while you feel powerless to stop it. I lost my wife, Anna, and I promised myself I'd never care that deeply again because the pain nearly destroyed me. But today, when Lily looked at me, when she said I had kind eyes, His voice broke for a second, something he hadn't allowed in years. She reminded me that I still have a heart, that I can't hide from life forever. Tears filled Anna's eyes as she listened. For the first time, the sharpness in her gaze softened completely. She saw the truth in him, the grief, the regret, the quiet strength that had been buried under years of distance. She realized then that Lucas Blake was not simply a powerful man in a suit. He was a man who had broken and learned how to build walls so high that no one could reach him, until her daughter, with a single question, had found the door. The waiting stretched on painfully, but finally, the doctor stepped out of the ward. Anna leapt to her feet, her heart racing. The doctor gave a small, reassuring nod. She's stable. The attack passed. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she'll be okay for now. Anna's knees nearly gave way with relief. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, tears spilling freely. Thank God, she whispered. Lucas exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest loosening for the first time in hours. He placed a hand lightly on Anna's back, grounding her as her relief threatened to overwhelm her. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Lucas shook his head. Don't. Just let me be here. For her. For you. It was a promise, spoken quietly but with the weight of a man who had once lost everything and was choosing, finally, to give again. That night, as Anna sat by her daughter's hospital bed, Lucas remained in the chair beside her. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Their silence was no longer heavy with walls, but filled with something new, something fragile, yet powerful. Trust. When Lily stirred in her sleep, her small fingers searching blindly across the blanket, it wasn't just Anna's hand she found. Lucas reached out too, and for the first time in years, his touch was steady, not with control, but with care. And as the storm outside finally began to ease, Anna realized that perhaps this meeting had never been chance. Perhaps fate had brought a sick little girl to a stranger's table, not only to rest, but to awaken the heart of a man who had forgotten what it meant to live. For Lucas, it was clear. His life, once measured in profits and power, had shifted in a single question. A child's voice had broken through the silence of his world and reminded him of the truth he had buried. That love, even fragile, was worth the risk of pain. And so, as dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, Lucas looked at Anna and Lily, the two people who had walked into his life by accident, and knew that everything would change. He had been a widowed CEO millionaire searching for nothing. Now, without even realizing it, he had found something greater than everything he had lost. A family,